Hi, Carter Krishnaiyer for the Florida Squeeze. A lot of polling data recently in Florida indicating that it could be competitive, and Kamala Harris has an opportunity to win Florida, which is not something I necessarily subscribed to until recently. But let's be honest, Florida has been for 25 years one of the most notoriously difficult states to poll. So, one of the things about Florida that makes it so difficult to poll is the transient nature of the population in Florida. And the fact that you have a lot of people registered in Florida that have either recently moved to Florida and sometimes don't get polled accurately or move out of Florida, right? There's an outflow of people too. I know there are propagandists who like to say, oh, everybody's moving to Florida, but there are a lot of people moving out of Florida also, and that's consistently been the case. And that's also tied to economics, a service-based economy. We don't have any heavy industry. We're 43rd in manufacturing of the 50 states, even though we're the third most populated state. So that says a lot about it. But going back to, I could go through historical elections. 2002, Democrats fared much better. Democrats fared much worse than the polling indicated. Election day 2002, we thought Bill McBride might have a chance to beat Jeb Bush. He lost by 13 points. 2004, similarly, there weren't many polls that had Bush 5 points ahead of Kerry in the state. Now, it's gone the other way, too. 2012, most polls had Romney within the margin of error or winning Florida toward the end. The polling average, I think, at the end was Romney plus 0.5 or something. And obviously, Obama won Florida. 2006, even, which was a Democratic wave year, the polls never picked up how deep and big the wave would be in Florida, partly because the governor's race wasn't necessarily competitive. Charlie Crist, who was then a Republican, obviously eventually switched parties and became a Democrat, but he won big in the governor's race. But down ballot from there, Democrats fared very, very well and better than I think a lot of people expected. More recently, Andrew Gillum in 2018, we'd have Governor Gillum and wouldn't have gone through the now 6 years of Ron DeSantis if polling had been accurate. And then 2020, I think that Biden was overrepresented in the Florida polls from the beginning. And there was an assumption that Biden, that Democratic turnout would be higher and that Biden would do even better among NPAs than he did. Now, he won NPAs in 2020, and this is what I want to get to. I think polling has become even more difficult in Florida because NPA registration has taken off, like it has in a lot of places, but particularly among non-traditional voting groups. Okay, so among non-whites, among your immigrant communities of color, outside of the African Americans, you see NPA numbers surging in the state. And another factor here is that Florida has more large media markets than any other state. So while Texas and California have more people than Florida, they don't have more large media markets. And that complicates weighting of polls, that complicates sampling, how you get your sample, your random sample. So that's been I think one of the problems for 25 years. But now with NPAs, I based on voter registration in the state and the decline in Democratic registration, Harris will probably need to win 60% or more of the NPA vote and have a decent turnout among NPAs then to have a chance to win the state. And that's a daunting number. But we don't necessarily know what kind of NPAs are being polled, right? Because an NPA could be someone who's just down the middle and doesn't like politics or political parties. An NPA can be someone who's very hard right and thinks the Republican Party is a party that's sold out conservative principles, which I think you could argue they have under Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump is not a conservative. Ron DeSantis is not a conservative. Okay, now Rick Scott is a conservative, so he's on the ballot this year in Florida. But that could be an NPA, and that NPA voter would lean Republican or might sit out this election or might vote Libertarian for all you know. Then you have NPAs on the left. And I know many of these people who were Democrats, who have re-registered as NPAs, say the Democrats are now a corporate party and a party that supports war and doesn't give health care access The Democrats are actually the more conservative party on issues of business regulation, which is, I think, bunk. That's nonsense. I mean, I don't like where the Democrats are positioned on that issue, on those issues, but that doesn't mean that they're somehow worse than the Republicans. But whatever the case, that's my personal opinion. There are a lot of NPAs on the left now. Now, what are those NPAs going to do? Are they going to vote for Harris? Are they going to turn out? Are they going to be moved by personal endorsements from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard to vote for Trump? I don't think endorsements mean that much. That's another thing I've learned through 30 years in politics. Individual endorsements don't mean a lot. The only individual endorsements I've seen that have meant a lot here in Florida have been in Democratic or Republican primaries. In Republican primary, if you had an endorsement from Jeb Bush back in the day, now if you have an endorsement from Donald Trump. Democratic primary, if you had an endorsement really from Bob Graham, he was the one. Other than that, did not make a difference. So I think there are a lot of variables here where I'm hedging a bit now. I still think Trump wins Florida. I still think Rick Scott gets reelected. I'm not convinced of the margins, and I'm not convinced the polling is necessarily accurate. If you just look at raw numbers, it's going to be very difficult for Democrats to win Florida ever again, or at least in the near future, because when Biden lost Florida in 2020, Democrats had a registration advantage. Now Republicans have there's arguments about this, right, because of inactive voters and active voters. But there's no question Republicans have a 500,000 to 1 million voter advantage. That's just a flip in 4 years. But I do think NPA voters, who have always been unpredictable, who have always been wild cards, and because of Florida's transient nature, make it a little more difficult to peg down. I think NPA voters are going to be even more unpredictable this time here in Florida. So anything could happen. That's why we love it so much. But I'm not sure how much stock you can put in the polling, even though we see a pattern developing in Florida polls. There's no real consensus on the margin Trump leads Florida by. It could be 2 points. It could be 9 points. And that's a huge spread in a state which has 23 million people. And it's not like the 2 to 9 point spread in a state like Nevada. We've seen polls swing pretty dramatically in Nevada. Nevada is a small state. Even Arizona is a relatively small state, despite their recent growth of both those states. Florida, a difference between 2 points and 9 points is massive. And that actually is something where I think the campaign's internal polling is going to matter, because that's going to determine whether or not you actually target the state and put resources here, because it costs more to run a campaign in Florida, a media campaign, than any other state. Again, because there are more large media markets in this state than any other place in the country.